This is the Cook and Eat Show, and this episode is called What's in My Fridge. This is where I put together snacks and meals from stuff around my kitchen. Sometimes there's a plan. Most times I'm just making it up as I go. Let's see what happens.
Today, I have found myself with a good handful of dates. These are a very naturally sweet fruit. These particular ones are dried and pitted, and I wanted to make some date squares. Despite how sweet they are, dates are actually pretty good for you. They contain fiber and potassium, and overall aren't as bad as anything processed. So we are going to make date squares. Let's take a look at the ingredients. Date squares call for oats, flour, baking soda, lemon juice, butter, a lot of brown sugar, and some water. So I'm cutting back on sugar. Let's replace that with agave nectar. It is a much better glucose for your body. And let's add in chia seeds. The wonderful thing about chia seeds is that even though they're small, they are packed with protein, fiber, calcium. They're fantastic. You should just add them to whatever, whenever. Let's get started. Cutting dates is not that easy. They're pretty sticky. Now, what I've done here is I've covered these in a brown rice flour, and the point of that was to make it easier to slice them up. It kind of sort of did. After a point, I just tried to use extremely blunt force. It worked. These specific dates are called deglet noor. I don't know if I'm saying that right. A lot of recipes, like the one linked below, calls for medjool dates. I'm not actually sure what the difference is, but whatever kind of dates you might have will work just fine. Now I'm adding the brown sugar and lemon juice as I boil these, just like the recipe calls for, and I'm just going to let these sit while I make the crisp. So I've made another recipe. It'll be linked somewhere, description somewhere, that also called for me to make a crisp. I had no idea what a crisp was. Now I get it. It's literally just chunks of a crust. That crust could be made out of oats, like what I'm using. I don't know if crisp is specific to just oats, but the ones that I've made call for oats. And you're creating this crumbled crust that you just put on top. This specific recipe, because it's a square, I won't necessarily keep the crust crumbled. I'll have to pat it down, which you'll see later. So trying to use a spoon to create this crumbly crust, whatever, it was just not working. So I got the bright idea of using my hand mixer instead. It worked so much better. So as I'm creating this first layer, things were just sticking to the spoon. It was a little bit difficult to try and get it to cover the whole bottom of the baking sheet. Eventually I kind of sort of got a flattening method. She's getting it, y'all. She's getting it. After the dates were done boiling, I just added everything into my blender to create the mushed look you see here. This was just to make it that much easier to spread the date mixture. And it did take quite a bit of water. I think a little bit more water than what the recipe called for. I would warn that it was pretty difficult to actually get the date mixture out of my blender once I mixed it. Maybe if you have a food processor, you might have better luck. For the top layer, I ended up having to use some parchment paper and just press it. I was not going to take the chance, given how much difficulty I had with creating that bottom layer. I was not going to take the chance of trying to put a layer on top of very soft date mixture. Eventually I was able to roll it out and kind of get it wide enough to cover the majority of the baking sheet I had. As I was using the rolling pin, one thing I had to be aware of was not flattening it too much. What I didn't want was to create a top layer that was so thin that maybe the dates would ooze out of the top too much or it would fall apart. So because it was so flat, I did try and use my fork to create that crumbly look to it. We shall see how that turns out. Sure, let's put this in the oven. Now this didn't take very long at all to bake, and I almost left it in a little too long, but it looks really good. All right, now that it's cooled down, it's time to cut it up, check it out, inspect it. Fingers crossed. I'm hoping that the crunchy, but not overly crunchy texture with the smooth texture of the dates really makes me feel like this is something that could more easily replace things like candy bars where I get the nuts and the chocolate, so I get the crunch and I get the sweetness. And that's really what's driving me making the date square anyway. Yeah, that's good. It's definitely a mouthful more than I thought, and only slightly overcooked. Well, I'm about to go enjoy this with a big glass of non-dairy milk. So I will catch y'all on the next episode.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that as much as I enjoyed putting it together. Thanks for watching. Till next time, keep eating.